A stranger among luxury. The morning sun bathed the towering glass facade of Vision Motors in a golden glow, reflecting the pristine city skyline of Los Angeles. This was no ordinary car dealership. It was a sanctuary of luxury, a place where the wealthy and powerful came to indulge in the finest automotive engineering. Inside, a symphony of sounds filled the air, the rhythmic tapping of high heels against the polished marble floors, the crisp rustle of designer suits, and the gentle hum of conversations between affluent clients and eager salesmen. The showroom itself was a glittering palace of modern innovation, with rows of gleaming supercars and grand touring machines, each parked like a carefully sculpted masterpiece beneath the high-tech showroom lights. Near the grand reception desk stood Ethan Carter, the dealership's senior sales manager. A man in his late 30s, he carried himself with the unshakable confidence of someone who believed he had mastered the art of judging people at a single glance. His suit, custom-tailored to perfection, complemented his slicked-back hair and the ever-present Rolex glinting on his wrist. He had spent years climbing the ranks, and his motto was simple: if you can't afford it, you shouldn't even be looking at it. He prided himself on his ability to identify serious buyers within seconds, the cut of their suits, the brand of their watches, the confidence in their stride. So when the glass doors of Vision Motors slid open and a man in a worn leather jacket, faded jeans, and scuffed boots walked in, Ethan's gaze instinctively narrowed. The man wasn't dressed poorly, but compared to the showroom's usual clientele, Hollywood elites, real estate moguls, and tech billionaires, he was an anomaly. His baseball cap was pulled low, partly hiding his face, and his stride was relaxed, almost too casual, as if he were just wandering in without a purpose. Ethan barely spared him a second glance before turning back to his coffee. But as the stranger walked past the reception desk and toward the sleek vehicles on display, Ethan smirked and leaned toward his colleague, Daniel, another salesman known for his sharp tongue. "Check out that guy," Ethan murmured, tilting his chin in the direction of the visitor. "Looks like someone walked in here by mistake. Maybe he's lost. Or maybe he just wants to take a selfie next to a car he'll never afford." Daniel chuckled. "I give him 5 minutes before he realizes he doesn't belong here and walks out." Across the showroom, the man stopped beside a silver Aston Martin Valhalla, his fingers grazing the flawless surface of the hood. He admired the curvature of the bodywork, the seamless blend of elegance and power. His expression was calm, appreciative, yet unreadable. Ethan took another sip of his coffee, shaking his head slightly. He had seen this before. Customers like these would walk in, stare in awe at the luxury around them, dream for a few minutes, and then quietly leave, realizing that this world wasn't theirs. But something about this particular man felt different. There was no hesitation in his step, no awestruck expression on his face. He wasn't gawking like someone overwhelmed by the sheer opulence surrounding him. He was studying the cars, not as an outsider, but as someone who understood them. Still, Ethan wasn't impressed. He placed his coffee cup down and made his way toward the man, his polished Oxford shoes clicking against the floor. He adjusted his tie as he approached, his expression polite but distant, the kind of forced courtesy it was meant to keep someone at arm's length. "Good morning, sir," Ethan said, his voice smooth yet unmistakably dismissive. "Are you looking for something specific, or just browsing?" The man looked up, and for the first time, Ethan caught a proper glimpse of his face. There was something familiar about him, something strikingly familiar. His features were chiseled yet kind, his deep-set eyes holding an air of quiet intensity. There was an ease in the way he carried himself, a presence that felt larger than life, even though he made no effort to draw attention to himself. But before Ethan could place where he had seen this face before, the man simply smiled, a small, unassuming smile, completely unaffected by Ethan's passive-aggressive tone. "I was just admiring the craftsmanship," the man said in a low, measured voice. Aston Martin really outdid themselves with this model. The twin-turbo V8 engine combined with the hybrid system. Pretty impressive engineering. Ethan arched an eyebrow. It wasn't often that someone off the street spoke so knowledgeably about the technical specs of a hypercar. Usually, only collectors, engineers, or car enthusiasts spoke with that level of appreciation. But Ethan wasn't swayed. "Yes, it's an exceptional vehicle," he replied, his tone slightly condescending. "Though it's a bit exclusive. Only a handful of people in the world can own one." The man gave a small nod, still unfazed. "I can imagine," he said, glancing around. "Looks like you have quite the selection here." Ethan crossed his arms, subtly glancing at the beat-up sedan parked outside, the one the man had arrived in. "We do cater to a specific clientele," Ethan said carefully. "People who are serious buyers. If you'd like, I can recommend some more affordable models, something that might be a bit more in line with your budget." It was a thinly veiled insult, and both men knew it. For the first time, the man's expression shifted ever so slightly. Not in anger, not in embarrassment, but in quiet amusement. It was then that the showroom doors opened once more, and a tall, sharply dressed man in a dark suit stepped inside. His gaze swept the room before he spotted the man in the leather jacket, and his entire demeanor shifted. "Mr. Reeves," the man called out, striding forward with urgency. Ethan's heart stopped. A few heads turned as murmurs rippled through the showroom. "Wait, did he just say Reeves? No way. That's not." And then it clicked. Ethan's mind raced back through the years, through the countless movies, interviews, and red carpet appearances. The humble demeanor, the quiet voice, the familiar yet almost unreal presence. Keanu Reeves. The Keanu Reeves. The Hollywood icon. The beloved, down-to-earth superstar. The man who had starred in some of the most legendary action films of all time. Ethan felt his throat go dry as realization crashed over him like a tidal wave. He had just mocked and condescended to one of the biggest celebrities in the world, and Keanu had let him. The weight of regret, and the unexpected twist. The moment the words "Mr. Reeves" echoed through the showroom, a heavy silence fell over the space. Ethan felt his breath catch in his throat. His body stiffened, his grip tightening on his wristwatch as if grounding himself in reality. He had been in the sales industry for over a decade, had met countless high-profile clients, and had always prided himself on reading people like an open book. Yet, here he stood, utterly blindsided. Keanu Reeves. The asterisk Keanu Reeves. The legend. The icon. The Hollywood megastar. And he had insulted him. A cold sweat pricked at Ethan's brow as his stomach churned with regret. He had assumed Keanu was just another nobody, a lost wanderer with no business in an elite showroom. How wrong he had been. All around, whispers erupted as employees and customers alike finally recognized the man in the worn leather jacket. A few gasps, murmured exclamations, and excited gestures rippled through the space like an electric current. "Holy crap, that's Keanu Reeves. No way, why didn't I recognize him before? Is he actually buying a car here?" Ethan felt the weight of every single eye on him, but none carried the quiet, knowing gaze of the man he had just disrespected. Keanu Reeves, on the other hand, remained completely unfazed. Despite the sudden attention, despite the shift in energy, his posture didn't change. He was still standing by the Aston Martin, calmly admiring its craftsmanship, as if nothing had happened, as if he wasn't the focus of every stunned glance in the room. And that's what unnerved Ethan the most. No arrogance, no anger, not even the slightest smugness. Just a quiet, almost amused acceptance. A moment of reckoning. The sharply dressed man, clearly a high-ranking executive, hurried toward Keanu with an air of respect that bordered on reverence. "Mr. Reeves, we weren't expecting you today," he said, extending his hand with an eager but professional smile. "It's always a pleasure to have you here." Keanu shook his hand with his signature humble nod. "Hey, no worries. I was just passing by and thought I'd check out the new models." The executive beamed. "Of course. You're always welcome here." Please, if there's anything at all you need, just let us know. We'd be honored to assist you." Ethan's stomach churned. The words cut like a knife, reminding him just how vastly different this treatment was compared to the way he himself had approached Keanu just minutes ago. Keanu, however, simply gave a small smile and glanced back at the car. "Thanks, but I was just having a look," he said, running his fingers across the sleek surface of the Aston Martin. The executive turned toward Ethan and Daniel, his expression shifting into something that resembled polite irritation. "Ethan," he said in a tone that made the sales manager's blood run cold, "were you assisting Mr. Reeves?" Ethan swallowed hard, struggling to form words, but before he could stammer out a response, Keanu, of all people, spoke up for him. "Yeah, he was just telling me about the different models," Keanu said, his voice light and even, "trying to find something in my budget." The humor in his tone was subtle, so subtle that it might have gone unnoticed to anyone else. But Ethan caught it, and it made him want to sink into the floor and disappear. The salesman's downfall. The executive's expression turned stone cold as his gaze landed back on Ethan. "Is that so?" he asked, his voice neutral but dripping with disapproval. Ethan felt like a man on trial, standing before an unforgiving judge. He started, but words failed him. How could he even begin to explain himself? That just minutes ago, he had dismissed Keanu Reeves as an unworthy window shopper. That he had mocked him in front of Daniel, assuming he couldn't afford even the cheapest vehicle in the showroom. Daniel, for his part, had gone silent, suddenly finding great interest in the floor tiles beneath his feet. The executive turned back to Keanu, regaining his composure. "Mr. Reeves, I sincerely hope you receive the level of service that we pride ourselves on providing," he said, his voice smoother now, carefully choosing his words. Keanu tilted his head slightly, as if thinking. Then, with a slow, knowing smile, he said, "It's been interesting." The room tensed. Ethan felt his insides collapse. Keanu didn't have to say more. That one simple sentence, so gentle, so unassuming, held more weight than any angry outburst ever could. Ethan's mind spun. Would he be fired? Would this moment become a viral sensation? Would he be known as the salesman who insulted Keanu Reeves? Just as panic threatened to overtake him, Keanu did something that Ethan never expected. He laughed. A soft, genuine chuckle escaped his lips as he shook his head, stepping away from the car. "Hey, don't sweat it," Keanu said, looking directly at Ethan. "I get it. People make assumptions. It happens." Ethan blinked, shocked. Keanu wasn't just forgiving him. He was letting it go. No grudge, no humiliation, just kindness. It was the last thing Ethan deserved, but it was also the only thing that made him realize how truly small he had been. The ultimate surprise. As if the moment wasn't surreal enough, Keanu turned to the executive and asked, "Actually, do you guys still have the 1967 Ford Mustang Fastback in stock?" The executive's eyebrows shot up. "The Mustang? You mean the classic Shelby GT 500? Keanu nodded. Ethan's confusion deepened. Why would a man like Keanu, a man who could afford any hypercar in the world, want an old-school muscle car instead? "Yeah, I've always had a soft spot for those," Keanu said, smiling. "Had one years ago. Thought I'd see if I could add another to my collection." The executive practically glowed with excitement. "Of course, Mr. Reeves. We'd be happy to arrange a private showing for you. Please, this way." As Keanu followed the executive toward the VIP section, he turned back for just a moment, his gaze landing on Ethan one last time. And in that moment, Ethan felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Humility. No lecture, no retaliation, no public shaming. Just an unspoken lesson, one that would stick with him far longer than any reprimand from his boss. As Keanu disappeared into the VIP showroom, Ethan exhaled. He had come face to face with someone who was not just a celebrity, but a man of true character. And he had failed that test. A lesson in true worth. The atmosphere inside Vision Motors remained thick with tension long after Keanu Reeves disappeared into the VIP showroom with the dealership executive. Ethan stood frozen, his confidence in shambles. The realization of what had just transpired hit him like a freight train. He had insulted and underestimated one of the most respected figures in Hollywood. Not just any celebrity. Keanu freaking Reeves. The whispers of customers and employees still lingered in the air, quiet murmurs spreading through the showroom like wildfire. Did you see how calm he was? Man, he could have made a scene, but he didn't. That's Keanu for you. Ethan really messed up. This is gonna stick with him. Ethan's jaw clenched as he looked over at Daniel, who had conveniently avoided eye contact since everything unraveled. The smirk that had once adorned his face was now replaced with an awkward silence. And then, a voice shattered his thoughts. Ethan. It was Mr. Hollis, the general manager of the dealership, standing with his arms crossed. His sharp, steel-gray eyes locked onto Ethan with an expression that promised consequences. My office. Now. Ethan swallowed hard. His career might be over. A manager's wrath. The office was eerily silent, save for the faint sound of Los Angeles traffic filtering through the tinted windows. Ethan stood stiffly in front of Mr. Hollis's mahogany desk, his fingers clenching and unclenching as he awaited the verbal lashing that was undoubtedly coming his way. Mr. Hollis sighed and leaned forward, clasping his hands together. What the hell were you thinking? He asked, his voice deceptively calm. Ethan tried to keep his composure. Sir, Save it. Mr. Hollis cut him off, shaking his head. You know who Keanu Reeves is. Ethan nodded stiffly. Then why did you treat him like a second-class citizen? Mr. Hollis's voice was sharp now, his irritation palpable. Because he didn't walk in wearing a Rolex and a $10,000 suit. Ethan's mouth went dry. This is a luxury dealership, he tried, his voice weaker than usual. I have to make snap judgments on who's actually here to buy and who's just wasting our time. Mr. Hollis leaned back, a mirthless laugh escaping his lips. Snap judgments, that's what you're going with. He tapped a finger against his desk. Let me give you some perspective, Ethan. Ethan held his breath. Keanu Reeves is not just a celebrity. He is one of the most respected, beloved, and wealthiest men in this industry. And yet, do you know what sets him apart from the other Hollywood millionaires and billionaires? Ethan remained silent. Mr. Hollis' expression hardened. He doesn't act like them. He doesn't demand special treatment. He doesn't flaunt his wealth. He walks into places like any other person, and that's exactly why people love him. Ethan felt a pit form in his stomach. You had a chance to treat him with the same dignity and respect that we give to every customer, regardless of their bank account. Mr. Hollis's tone grew more intense. Instead, you humiliated yourself. Ethan's heart pounded. He had worked too hard to let one mistake ruin everything. Sir, You're suspended, Mr. Hollis interrupted coldly. The words hit like a punch to the gut. Suspended, Ethan echoed, his voice barely above a whisper. 1 week. Without pay. Mr. Hollis's stare was unforgiving. And if I hear even a whisper about you treating another customer like that, you're done here. Ethan wanted to argue, wanted to fight, but he knew he deserved this. Every bit of it. Without another word, he turned and walked out of the office, his head low. An unlikely redemption. For the first time in his entire career, Ethan was forced to sit on the other side of the glass. Instead of leading negotiations, making sales, and commanding respect from his colleagues, he was benched, humiliated, reduced to an observer while his peers whispered behind his back. It was during this time that he began to realize something deeply unsettling. He had built his entire career on perception. The right suit, the right watch, the right car. But what about the right attitude? For the first time in years, Ethan started watching people instead of judging them. He noticed how some of the wealthiest clients dressed plainly, while some of the most arrogant ones flaunted expensive designer clothes. He noticed how kindness went further than any sales pitch ever could. And above all, he noticed how Keanu Reeves had handled everything with grace. No anger, no revenge, no power play, just humility and quiet wisdom. It made Ethan question everything about the way he had approached life and business. Then, on his 6th day of suspension, something unexpected happened. A mystery package arrived at Vision Motors. A package for him. Ethan hesitantly opened it, finding a small black box inside. And inside the box was a handwritten note. "Hey Ethan, no hard feelings. Hope this helps you see things a little differently. Kr." Ethan frowned and reached deeper into the box, his hands brushing against something solid and metallic. When he pulled it out, his breath caught in his throat. It was a sleek, stainless steel Rolex Daytona. Not just any Rolex. The same exact model Ethan had spent years obsessing over, the one he had believed separated him from the elite. The watch he had once used to judge others was now in his hands, a gift from the man he had misjudged the most. Ethan stared at it, his chest tightening. Keanu wasn't trying to show off. He was teaching him a lesson. It wasn't about money or status. It was about character. Ethan had spent years looking down on people he assumed weren't wealthy enough to deserve his time. And yet, the wealthiest man he had ever met was the only one who had ever looked at him with kindness. Tears burned in his eyes, but he blinked them away. For the first time in his life, Ethan didn't feel like the man who had everything. He felt like the man who had been given a second chance. And this time, he wasn't going to waste it. A shift in perspective. Ethan sat at his dining table, staring at the Rolex in his hands. The weight of the timepiece felt heavier than its actual mass. For years, he had measured success by material things: a custom suit, an imported watch, a luxury car, a high-rise apartment. Everything in his life was about status. And yet, the man who had everything had just handed him something more valuable than money. A lesson. Not in words, not in lectures. Just a gesture, one so powerful that it had cracked something deep inside him. Keanu Reeves hadn't given him a Rolex to show off his wealth. He had given it to him to remind him of what really mattered. Ethan exhaled deeply, rubbing his temples. A week ago, he had walked into that showroom believing he was superior, that he had life all figured out, that money and status dictated a person's worth. Now, all of that felt hollow. For the first time in his entire career, he wasn't thinking about how to climb higher. He was thinking about how much he had missed along the way. And it scared him. Returning to the showroom. The day Ethan's suspension ended, he walked back into Vision Motors feeling like a stranger in his own skin. Everything looked the same: the pristine marble floors, the gleaming cars, the high-profile clientele, and the carefully dressed salespeople. But he wasn't the same. His colleagues greeted him with mixed reactions. Some smirked, knowing he had been put in his place. Others gave him sympathetic nods, as if they expected him to be humbled by the experience. Ethan didn't care about any of that. His focus was elsewhere. As he settled back at his desk, something unusual caught his eye. A young man, probably in his early 20s, walked into the showroom wearing simple jeans and a hoodie. His sneakers looked a little worn, and his posture screamed hesitation. Immediately, Ethan recognized the pattern. A month ago, he would have dismissed this customer outright, would have assumed he was a waste of time. But now, he knew better. Ethan stood and walked over with a genuine smile. "Hey, welcome to Vision Motors," he greeted warmly. "Looking for something in particular?" The young man hesitated, rubbing the back of his neck. I was just looking around. I probably don't belong here." Ethan's chest tightened. That was the exact mindset he himself had helped create in others. "Of course you belong here," Ethan said, surprising himself with how sincere it sounded. "Come on, Let me show you something. He led the young man toward a sleek silver Porsche, one of the dealership's best models. This here is one of our newest releases, Ethan explained. It's got an insane twin-turbocharged engine and some of the smoothest handling you'll ever feel. The young man's eyes lit up with excitement as he gently ran his fingers along the car's surface. "It's beautiful," he murmured. "I always dreamed of owning something like this." Ethan watched him carefully. There was something familiar about the way the kid admired the car. Not like someone who was just there to daydream, but like someone who actually understood what made it special. "You a car guy?" Ethan asked. The young man chuckled. "Yeah, I actually study automotive engineering. I love this stuff." Ethan smiled. A month ago, he would have walked away at the first sign that this customer wasn't rich enough to buy today. Now, he saw something else. Passion. A real love for cars. And that was worth his time. "Tell you what," Ethan said. "Why don't you sit inside? Get a feel for it." The young man's eyes widened. "Wait, really?" "Yeah," Ethan said with a nod. "Go for it." The kid carefully slid into the driver's seat, his hands running over the steering wheel like he was memorizing every inch of it. "Wow," he breathed. And just like that, Ethan saw something he hadn't in years. Not a potential buyer. Not a waste of time. But a kid who just needed someone to believe in him. "You know," Ethan said casually, "you might not be able to afford it today. But that doesn't mean you won't someday." The young man looked up sharply, as if the words had hit him deeper than expected. "Really?" Ethan nodded. "Absolutely. If you love something enough, you'll find a way to make it happen." The young man's expression shifted, a spark of confidence flickering in his eyes. "Thanks, man," he said sincerely. "That actually means a lot." Ethan smiled. "Anytime." An unexpected return. Later that afternoon, while Ethan was reviewing paperwork at his desk, a familiar voice made him look up. "Hey, Ethan." His heart skipped a beat. Keanu Reeves was standing in front of him, wearing the same worn leather jacket and faded jeans. Ethan shot to his feet. "Mr. Reeves." Keanu chuckled. "Keanu's fine." Ethan cleared his throat, struggling to process what was happening. What can I do for you?" he asked, suddenly feeling awkward. Keanu reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a set of keys. He tossed them onto the desk, and Ethan's eyes widened. "Wait, these are..." "The Mustang GT 500, Keanu confirmed, smiling. "I want you to do something for me." Ethan blinked in confusion. Anything." Keanu's smile grew wider. "I want you to drive it." Ethan's mind short-circuited. "Me?" Keanu nodded. "Yeah, consider it part of the lesson." Ethan's mouth went dry. "Sir, I can't just..." "You can." Keanu interrupted. His voice was calm but firm. "Take it out for a drive. Feel it. And remember, cars aren't just about status. They're about the experience." Ethan's chest tightened. This was more than just a test drive. It was Keanu's way of showing him that life wasn't about judging who could afford what. It was about appreciation, about passion, and most of all, about never underestimating someone based on appearance alone. Ethan exhaled deeply, then picked up the keys. "All right," he said, his voice steady. "Let's go for a ride. The ride of realization." Ethan's hands gripped the leather-wrapped steering wheel of the 1967 Mustang GT 500, his heart pounding in his chest. This was surreal. Just a week ago, he had belittled and dismissed Keanu Reeves. Now, he was sitting behind the wheel of Keanu's classic Mustang, about to take it for a spin. The engine rumbled like a beast awakening, deep and powerful, shaking the car ever so slightly. It wasn't like the modern luxury sports cars he was used to. This was raw, untamed American muscle, a machine that demanded respect. Keanu slid into the passenger seat, completely at ease. "You nervous?" he asked, a small smile playing on his lips. Ethan let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. A little. Keanu chuckled. Good. That means you're paying attention. Ethan nodded, gripping the shifter. All right, Keanu said. Let's take her out. Just enjoy the drive. Breaking free from the past. The Mustang roared to life as Ethan pressed the gas, pulling out of the dealership's private lot and onto the open road. The rush of power beneath him was thrilling, not just because of the car itself, but because, for the first time in a long time, Ethan felt free. No sales targets. No pressure to impress. No calculated conversations designed to size up someone's worth. Just the road, and a man who had taught him more in the past week than anyone else had in his entire career. As they cruised down Sunset Boulevard, the warm California air rushing through the open windows, Ethan finally broke the silence. Why'd you do it? He asked, keeping his eyes on the road. Keanu glanced at him. Do what? The Rolex. The Mustang. Giving me another chance, Ethan clarified. You could have made me look like a fool. Could have called me out in front of everyone. Could have gotten me fired. Keanu chuckled softly. Yeah, I could have. Ethan waited for more, but Keanu didn't immediately elaborate. Instead, he leaned his arm against the window, watching the passing cityscape as if deep in thought. Finally, he spoke. You ever hear the story about the time I got stranded on the side of the road? Keanu asked. Ethan furrowed his brows. No. Keanu smiled slightly. Few years back, my bike broke down in the middle of nowhere. It was late. I had no phone signal. Couldn't call anyone for help. I just sat there, waiting for a miracle. Ethan listened intently, intrigued. After about an hour, this beat-up old pickup truck pulls over, Keanu continued. Guy gets out, total stranger, just a regular dude, covered in grease, probably on his way home from a long shift. Keanu glanced at Ethan. You know the first thing he said to me. Ethan shook his head. You look like you could use a hand. Keanu chuckled, shaking his head. He didn't ask who I was. Didn't care about what I did for a living. He just saw a guy in trouble and wanted to help. Ethan felt something stir inside him. I offered to pay him, Keanu said, his voice softer now. He wouldn't take a dime. Just said, nah, man. Just help someone else when they need it. A long silence followed. Then Keanu shrugged. So, that's what I try to do. Help when I can. Give people the benefit of the doubt, because you never know who you're really talking to. Ethan gripped the wheel tighter. That hit him hard. For years, he had measured people by what they wore, what they drove, how much they could spend. And yet, here was Keanu Reeves, a man who had more wealth than Ethan could ever dream of, living by a completely different rulebook. Keanu didn't care about status, didn't care about appearances, didn't care about the games people played to prove their worth. He just believed in helping people. Ethan swallowed hard, staring straight ahead. I was a real jerk, wasn't I? He muttered. Keanu smirked. You were a salesman. Ethan groaned. Ouch. Keanu laughed. The moment of clarity. As the Mustang cruised through the twisting canyon roads, Ethan felt something inside him unravel. For the first time in years, he wasn't thinking about closing a deal, making a sale, or proving himself to anyone. He was just driving, living in the moment. And as the engine growled beneath him, the city lights glittering in the distance, he finally understood. Life wasn't about what you had. It was about who you were. And for the first time in a long time, he wanted to be someone better. Back at the dealership, by the time they pulled back into Vision Motors, Ethan felt like he had been through a transformation. He parked the Mustang, letting the engine settle into a deep, satisfied purr. Keanu stepped out first, stretching. Well, what do you think? Ethan leaned against the car, exhaling. I think. I get it now. Keanu nodded, his expression unreadable. Good. Then he tossed Ethan the keys. Ethan fumbled, barely catching them. His eyes widened. Wait, what are you? Keanu grinned. Keep it. Ethan's heart stopped. What? No, no way. This car's worth a fortune. Keanu shrugged. So? Ethan was speechless. Keanu patted the hood of the Mustang. Think of it as a reminder. Every time you sit in that driver's seat, remember today. Remember that life isn't about who's got the most money. It's about how you treat people. Ethan stared at him, completely blown away. I don't know what to say, he admitted. Keanu smiled, then reached out and clasped Ethan's shoulder. Then don't say anything. And with that, he walked away, hands in his pockets, disappearing into the bustling city streets like a man who had never needed the spotlight to shine. Ethan stood there for a long time, staring at the keys in his hands. Then, slowly, a smile spread across his face. For the first time in years, he finally understood what it meant to be rich, and it had nothing to do with money. Paying it forward, Ethan sat in the driver's seat of the Mustang, the keys still warm in his palm. The roar of the engine had faded, but the impact of what had just happened remained, etched into his mind like a permanent mark. Keanu Reeves, a man who could buy any car in the world, had just given him this classic Mustang, not as a gift for his ego, not as a reward, but as a lesson, a reminder. Remember that life isn't about who's got the most money. It's about how you treat people. The words echoed in his head. Ethan ran his fingers over the steering wheel, a deep breath escaping his lips. For years, he had believed status was everything. But now he had a responsibility. He couldn't just take the lesson and move on. He had to live it. A different kind of customer. The next morning, Ethan arrived at Vision Motors earlier than usual. The Mustang, his Mustang, was parked out front, gleaming in the early sunlight. He still couldn't believe it was his. But he wasn't thinking about the car. He was thinking about how he could be better. As he entered the showroom, he noticed his colleagues still whispering about what had happened. He's a lucky guy. Man, if Keanu gave me a car, I'd quit on the spot. I still can't believe he changed overnight. That's gotta be an act, right? Ethan didn't respond. He wasn't here to prove anything. He was here to do better. And that opportunity came sooner than expected. As the morning rush of wealthy clients filled the showroom, Ethan spotted a young woman standing awkwardly near the entrance. She looked out of place, not because of her clothes, but because of the hesitation in her stance. She clutched a small notebook in her hands, her eyes darting around as if she was debating whether she even belonged here. Ethan recognized that look. It was the same look that young man from the other day had worn. A look that said, I don't belong in this world. So Ethan did something he never would have done before. He walked over. Hi there, he greeted warmly, looking for something specific. The woman hesitated. Oh, no, I was just looking. Ethan nodded, giving her the space to breathe. That's great, he said genuinely. Do you like cars? The question seemed to surprise her. Yeah, I do. Ethan smiled. Then you're in the right place. She relaxed slightly, but still looked unsure. But she hesitated. I'm not here to buy. I love cars, but I don't have the money for something like this. I probably shouldn't even be here. Ethan's heart tightened. That used to be his own mindset, that someone's worth was based on their wallet. Hey, he said gently, can I tell you a secret? The woman blinked in confusion. A secret? Ethan leaned in slightly. You don't have to buy something to appreciate it. She stared at him. Really? Really? Ethan gestured to the cars around them. You know who comes in here all the time? Engineers, designers, people who just love these machines, not because they can buy them, but because they respect them. You're here because you love cars, right? She nodded slowly. Then you belong here as much as anyone else, Ethan said firmly. In fact, if you're really into cars, you should check this one out. He led her to a sleek Ferrari 296 GTB, a hybrid supercar that screamed both power and innovation. As soon as she saw it, her eyes lit up. "Oh my God," she whispered. Ethan smiled. He didn't see a customer in front of him. He saw someone who loved cars, just like he did. "Go ahead," he encouraged. "Sit inside." Her head snapped up in shock. "Wait, really?" Ethan nodded. With a mixture of disbelief and excitement, she carefully slipped into the driver's seat, her hands trembling as they touched the steering wheel. Ethan saw it then, the exact same awe he had felt in the Mustang yesterday. Not greed, not envy, just pure appreciation. And in that moment, he knew this was what mattered. Not money, not status, not impressing the rich, just treating people like they mattered. Because they did. An offer he never expected. As the day wound down, Ethan was finishing up some paperwork when Mr. Hollis, his boss, walked over. "Got a minute?" Ethan sat up. "Of course, sir." Mr. Hollis studied him for a long moment. "You've changed." Ethan exhaled. "Yeah, I think I have." His boss smirked. "About time." Ethan chuckled. "Listen," Mr. Hollis said, shifting his tone. "I've been keeping an eye on you. The way you've been handling customers since you came back. That's the kind of attitude this dealership needs." Ethan frowned slightly. "What are you saying?" Mr. Hollis slid a folder onto the desk. Ethan hesitated, then flipped it open. His eyes widened. "A promotion?" he asked, barely believing what he was seeing. Mr. Hollis nodded. "You're good at what you do, Ethan. You always have been. But now you actually care. And that's what makes the difference." Ethan swallowed hard. A month ago, a promotion would have meant everything to him. Now, it was just a bonus, because he had already found something far more valuable. Still, he smiled and extended his hand. "I won't let you down." Mr. Hollis shook it. "I know you won't." As his boss walked away, Ethan looked down at the promotion papers, then over at the Mustang keys on his desk. His life had changed forever. And for the first time, he liked who he was becoming, the legacy of a lesson. Ethan stepped into Vision Motors the following morning, the crisp scent of leather and fresh wax filling the air. But today felt different. Not because of the promotion sitting on his desk. Not because of the Mustang GT 500 waiting for him in the parking lot. But because, for the first time in years, he wasn't just showing up for a paycheck. He was here to make a difference. A new kind of success. The shift in Ethan's attitude hadn't gone unnoticed. Customers who once received surface-level sales pitches were now getting genuine conversations. The team, once skeptical about his sudden transformation, began seeing it for themselves. Even Daniel, the colleague who used to encourage Ethan's arrogance, had started following his lead. And then there was her, the young woman who had been afraid to step into the dealership just a few days prior. She had returned. But this time, she wasn't alone. She walked in with an older man, a man in his late 50s, his gait slow but steady. His clothes were simple, his hair streaked with gray, and his hands bore the rough calluses of a lifetime of hard work. Ethan immediately recognized her. "Hey," he greeted with a smile. "Welcome back." The woman smiled shyly. "This is my dad," she introduced. "He's the reason I love cars." The older man extended his hand. "You must be Ethan," he said in a deep voice. "My daughter couldn't stop talking about how you treated her like she mattered when she came here." Ethan shook his hand firmly, feeling a wave of gratitude. "Well, she does matter," he said simply. The older man chuckled. "That's rare in a place like this." "Not anymore," Ethan replied. And he meant it. They spent the next hour walking through the showroom, talking about engines, designs, and the future of automobiles. By the time they were done, Ethan wasn't just selling a car. He was helping a father and daughter share a dream. When they finalized the purchase of a mid-range BMW, the father shook Ethan's hand again. "You know, son," he said, "I've bought a lot of cars in my time, but this is the first time I felt like someone actually cared about the person behind the money." Ethan smiled. "That means more to me than you know." A familiar stranger returns. Just as the day was winding down, the glass doors of Vision Motors slid open. Ethan glanced up instinctively, and his heart skipped a beat. Keanu Reeves walked in. Same leather jacket, same calm presence. But this time, he wasn't just a customer. He was a friend. Ethan immediately straightened up. "Keanu," he greeted warmly. Keanu smirked. "Hey, Ethan." Ethan stepped forward, extending his hand. Keanu shook it without hesitation. "Didn't expect to see you again so soon," Ethan admitted. Keanu shrugged playfully. "What can I say? I like checking in on people." Ethan chuckled. "So, what brings you in?" Keanu's gaze flickered to the Mustang parked outside. "How's she treating you?" Ethan exhaled, running a hand through his hair. "She's more than a car, Keanu. She's a reminder." Keanu smiled knowingly. "That's what I was hoping for." A brief silence stretched between them, a silence filled with understanding. Then Keanu spoke again. "You know what I think?" Ethan raised an eyebrow. "What?" Keanu leaned in slightly. "I think you finally get it." And just like that, the last piece of the puzzle clicked into place. Ethan grinned. "Yeah," he said quietly. "I think I do." Keanu nodded, his job here done. "Good," he said. "Then I'll lead you to it." He turned to walk away. But just before he reached the door, he paused. "Oh, and Ethan." Ethan looked up. Keanu smirked. "Next time someone walks in wearing scuffed boots and an old jacket, give them the good treatment right away." Ethan laughed. "You have my word." Keanu gave him a small wave before disappearing through the doors, fading into the city like a legend walking back into the shadows. Ethan stood there for a long moment. Then, with a deep breath, he turned back to the showroom. Because today wasn't just another day. Today was the start of something new. And for the first time in his life, he wasn't chasing wealth. He was chasing meaning.